I grew up in a small beach town in the south of Spain, and I'm originally Arabic. I'm Libyan, but obviously being born and raised in Spain, I've always had this funny complex of being too Spanish to be Arabic, and then being too Arabic to be Spanish. So whatever country I bounce between, I always feel like I don't really belong quite, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of makes me what they call, I think it's a third culture kid. I think that's what they call us these days. So I think I've always had this interesting sort of knack to kind of figure out who I really am, if that makes sense. In this, I don't have that high school upbringing of a Libyan kid or of a Spanish kid in a Spanish school, because I went to an international school even. So even then, that's a bit more limbo even, all of your colleagues and teachers are from absolutely everywhere. So you really feel like you're not part of a country. But I think I was kind of okay with that as a kid.
There was a point in my life it was so easy to say, oh, I lived a third of my life in Morocco, a third in Libya, and a third in the US. Now it's much more ridiculous and complicated than that.
It's amazing.
But at the same time, this sense of like, when I'm in one of these places, I don't feel 100% belonging, because I come with other layers, and that gives you advantages to navigate and understand life and deal with things. But at the same time, it makes it less easy for other people who don't have that experience to feel, oh, he's one of us, he lived this and that. So this outsider thing, how apparent was that when visiting Libya, for example, or when, dealing with that particular element of who you are, where you come from?
I think the very obvious one, the first one that just comes to mind, I think, is the dialect more than anything, I think more than anything, whenever we'd stop at a shop or at a petrol station or anything, or even at the airport, and when someone who quite obviously has lived in Libya for their whole life is hearing you speak in your Libyan, you can almost see along their forehead, like, I wonder where they live, like, what foreign country did they come from? And it's just an inherent thing, I think, from having lived abroad, that certain colloquial words in Libyan, even if you say them, they sound slightly different, because I guess Libya, it's quite a singing accent at the same time. So if you don't sing the same song, then people just instantly pick you out, and you get called out for it. So I think a little bit with the language, and then also, little things like just within the mannerisms of communicating in Libyan, or sometimes the sense of humor or the jokes, or TV, sometimes references just completely over your head. And just little things like that you miss out when you don't grow up in that country.
Even if you do, it's something I'm experiencing now, because I haven't lived there for 5 years now, even more. I can't especially relate to the lingo that just developed, the trendy things that are taking place in the last 5 years. So no matter how much you've done the initial bit, you can't keep up, So in a way, that's always stacked against you to feel the sense of belonging. But at the same time, with the current situation in mind, is there are so many Libyans that are out of the country.
Yeah.
Whether it's in neighboring countries, Europe, US.
Yeah.
Much more than it used to be before. And it's, in a way, there is tools and social media and so many elements that could bring them together with a shared experience, even though they're not physically there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot of sort of you can definitely relate with people, and you instantly have so much more in common with Libyans outside of Libya, and just the struggles and little inconveniences of not being 100% Libyan, if that makes sense. And definitely it's a way that you can start to draw common lines between each other, especially that whole thing that I was saying before of being too Libyan to be Spanish, or wherever you're from, and being too Spanish to be Libyan, and it's definitely this sort of confused state that you're in, that it's quite a nice feeling when you know that there's other people that are going through the same thing, and that can relate to you, because even though Libya is quite a small population, you still always have this feeling of like, I must be the only one that doesn't get like 100% the whole the whole package. Like you almost feel like you're the only one for a little bit, but then it's quite relieving that there's a massive herd of other people that are going through the exact same thing, just with different countries, you know. And I think it's beautiful, really, that there are so many people that have this sort of dual aspect identity to them, you know.
In your case is much more than dual. I think you're much more confused than the rest of us.
Yeah.
English, Spanish, and Libyan.
Yeah.
But in a way, it's not confusing to you because you've grew up with all of this, as you mentioned. You know, physically Marbella, international school, and you constantly went back and forth to Libya. So you're not one of those people that were not sort of connected on the get-go, and you were like shocked at 18 to go like, you know, you kind of belong here. There was a connection that's growing, and that's sort of what your parents invested in.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, my parents did an amazing job in that sense, and I think they've taught me to do the exact same thing for my kids, I'm sure. Just because I've seen the value and the benefits of having touched base every single year, minimum once, you know. That there is just this constant reminder to know exactly where you're from, and I think it's a very humbling thing to grow up with. And it just teaches you something new every single time you go as you grow up, which is such an important thing, rather than, you know, it's nice to experience that as you're forming as a person, rather than when it's too late, when you're older, and then the culture clash hits you a bit harder, you know, and then sometimes you can just you can react to that clash. But I think when you're growing up, I think it dovetails quite nicely with with the person you're forming to be, you know. You know, just little things like when, I mean, we were quite lucky. We had an Arabic Sunday school teacher that used to come to the house every Sunday, a Moroccan teacher. He was so patient, bless him. We were such a pain to teach. And he would teach us, obviously, Fusha Arabic, which is international Arabic. Then we'd go back to Libya, and our cousins would be like, "Tila ya Rashid, ta'ala jay." And I'd literally look at my parents like, was that Arabic? Or what was? And then I'd be like, "Oh, okay, cool. Okay, I understand that now. Okay, cool." So then you add that to your vocabulary, and you just add layers and layers and layers and layers, and it's just such a amazing, like, cocktail at the end that you have.
Is it AI machine learning?
Yeah.
Just add this layer to the base. And then...
Exactly. Add that to the library. And you know what? It's almost, I mean, I can't really say it's the same with Spanish, but kind of the same also within the mannerisms and the culture and the way of behaving. And then you kind of pick both, and then you just become this weird Frankenstein of two cultures. But I think it's beautiful, really. And I think, you know.
But in a way, there's it's still an assumption for me. I haven't lived in Europe other than the past 5 years, and UK is kind of further up, not Mediterranean. But is there common ground culturally between living in Marbella and the other side, Trablus, in terms of lifestyle, in terms of food, how people do things? You're like, oh, this is kind of the same, but with a little twist.
Yeah, that's really. And I've never honestly stopped to think about that before, if I'm honest with you. But I mean, if I was to say, maybe probably the really strong family values that both cultures have. You know, there's always this very sort of utmost respect for the eldest person in a Spanish family or in a Arabic family, and you know, always being surrounded by love the whole time, and sharing is I think it's a Mediterranean thing, you know. I think because, you know, food is almost a sacred moment where it's always with the family, it's always at home, surrounded by your loved ones, and sharing everything, and asking the younger kids how their days were, and, you know, learning from the elder people in the family. And I think there's quite a lot of common lines that can be drawn between each, I think, actually. And also I think in the humor, because I think, you know, I was saying this to someone the other day, where in English the humor would usually be one-liners or manufactured stories. I think in Arabic and in Spanish humor, it's all based on experiences, you know, and like actual stories that happen to people. So I think there's quite a lot of commonalities between both cultures.